And hello again, boys and girls. Welcome back to the channel, and it's your host, Marley Startled. And today, before I do my art direction review of Prussia, I thought I would talk about revolts, radicalism, and revolution, how to stop it, and how they occur. This should hopefully be a bit more of a help for you, so that when you do eventually decide to play a more sort of challenging nation with a more fragmented political party system, then you can, of course, avert crisis and impending revolution. This is with the Anabid AI mod, so you can see I'm not doing particularly well with against France. I'm trying to catch up, but I don't think I'll be able to. Militarily, I can clap him, but I can't actually seem to catch up with the French blob of doom. But regardless, let us now talk about radicals and revolution. So, what is radicalism? So radicalism is the desire for change within your nation. Now, this can occur from several routes, and of course you can see up here, this is the total amount of radicals. Now, if you scroll over, you can see, of course, what can be causing radicalism, and it's often a result of either discrimination, reductions in standard of living, and of course, being pushed by political parties who are unhappy with the status quo. Now, this number here isn't too bad. You can have a large amount of radicals as long as you've got a fairly happy government or fairly happy members of the government whose political clout is too small to be a much of a threat. So what I mean by this is if you've got one radical party that has 1% of the population, odds are they're not going to be causing any revolutions anytime soon because they're too small a party to actually cause any issues. But if you've got a party that's 10% of the population, then of course this could be a dangerous number because that's when they start to make their play. Now, when we talk about this a little bit more in depth, you'll understand sort of what is sort of like a positive feedback loop. So radicalism can then cause interest parties to be unhappy, interest parties can then cause revolution, or interest parties can be unhappy, thus causing radicals, thus causing them to cause revolution. But really, the number itself is not the end of the world. It's what the political parties do about it. And so you've got to really bear in mind who you upset during the government run. So you're going to have high radicals as long as your political parties are happy. So let's take a look at our political parties and talk more about actual revolts and revolution. So we can see here we have, as Germany now, the party of the free-minded People's Party, of the trade unionists, the industrialists, the intelligentsia, the armed forces. Then we have the Communist Party of the rural folk, the petite bourgeoisie of the Conservative Party, and the Junkers as part of the Conservative Party. Now, each political party has its own views and desires, and each will potentially be at odds with another party. So, for example, the rural folk may be at odds with migration controls. So if we take a look, slavery banned, poor laws, poor health laws, no, these guys will be fine. So if we take a look here, census dissent, opposes councils, opposes no police. But actually, if we just go over here and go, let's go over this taxation, we'll see who is upset by what. This means that when you're trying to reform your government, your political parties will obviously start to become out of equilibrium. Now, early on, when there's a small amount of political parties of sort of the landowners and the aristocrats, it can be very easy to pass laws as long as you don't upset them too much. But once your nation begins to fragment and you have many different stakeholders, you can eventually end up in a situation where passing some laws will inevitably cause some form of upset and radicalism. So where do all these political parties sort of come from? So the first thing we need to note is that a lot of certain research will sort of introduce new radical parties or new political parties. So if we go to technology, go to society and find anarchism, unlocks anarchy law, unlocks anarchy society, and leads to political agitation. So if you want to avoid late game political parties, then of course you may want to avoid trying to do some of these researches. The other route is, of course, the social economic system. So each political party may exist, but its political clout will stem from the population of your nation. So if you build wide, like I do in my mini games, of industrialists, bureaucrats, an industry, a rural industry, an education system, and try and become self-contained, then you're going to have a lot of different stakeholders with a lot of equal sort of political clout. You can see here, with the exception being the sort of trade unions, because I've been bolstering them, I've got industrialists, intelligentsia, armed forces, rural folk, petty bourgeoisie, and Junkers, all around that sort of 11 to 10% political clout. That's because my nation has been sort of built equally, so that you've got a fair equal amount of buildings that are all sort of industrial, equal rural, a fairly large amount of government buildings, and a fairly large amount of arts academies for the intelligentsia, and so on and so forth. And of course, universities where, if I can find them, I will show them to you. Yeah, 4760, so on and so forth. This means that, of course, the social demographic makeup of my nation is now about, evenly split between the different political parties. And that all, of course, means that now they have all sort of an equal amount of political clout. Now, this can be where the problem begins, because now with all these equal stakeholders with varying views, you're always going to have some political group that is unhappy. And so one thing you can do is build your economy to make sure that one particularly political party is not particularly strong within your nation. And to do that, you could either focus very much on importing rural goods and focusing heavy on industry to cut down on the rural folk, cut down on petty bourgeoisie and Junkers, or you could build toll without relying too much on universities or arts academies, reducing the political clout of the intelligentsia. Or you can, of course, build extremely rural and have the trade unions and the industrialists lose their power. That, of course, has its pros and cons, because of course, that means your nation will be weaker to external economic forces, such as embargoes and trade deficits. But it also means that your political nations will be more secure. Now, what happens when you get a high amount of radicalism is that eventually these nations will become more and more unhappy by default. Coupled with certain political views they have of your government, they will eventually become unhappy, giving you penalties, and then, of course, become angry. Now, it's really around sort of the angry mark that you've got to really worry about the different parties and causing radicalism. So these guys are fairly unhappy, and so there's a potential risk for revolts. But really, it's when they're angry. At which point, once they're angry, they will begin to wait and sieve quietly until the radical number gets high enough for them to do a revolution play. Now, this does not have to be by themselves, because they can join in with other angry political parties to then, of course, make a larger sort of coalition of revolutionaries that demand certain reforms. This means that if you want to sort of prevent revolt risks, or you want to sort of reduce the risk of revolt, then you want to be able to either keep as many political parties happy, which of course may mean political stagnation and a lack of reform, or you want to reduce their political clout as so much that they're unable to form a particularly large revolutionary bloc. We can see here with the evangelical church, they're only 1.3% of the population. That means that even though I've got 13.9 million radicals, the odds are these guys aren't going to be able to do anything to stop me. But a coalition of rural folk, the petite bourgeoisie and the Junkers, who revolt against a certain law I try and pass, will be potentially dangerous and may cause revolt because of their political clout. So, what are the ways to deal with revolution? So when you get a revolution risk, you should see a little message on the right-hand side saying percentage away from revolution, and they want either a particular law kept in place or a particular law introduced. So the first thing you can do, which is a bit cheesy, is you can pretend to pass the law. So you can go to your government tab when the revolution is occurring for, I don't know, per capita taxation, select per capita taxation, and then gradually, by default, the revolutionaries will begin to become slowly happy as things go on before disappearing. Then, of course, you can go back to your laws and then cancel the law. Of course, this only buys you a short amount of time because, again, if the radicals are high and the political parties are still unhappy, then, of course, what happens is the revolution comes back. And this time, depending on certain laws, you will not be able to activate the law again. So this really is a time-buying strategy. Now, not every law has a sort of cooldown to have it enforced. For example, I believe the distribution of power does not have a cooldown, nor does the monarchy have a cooldown. So your worst case scenario, you can pick either a different law that those political parties like, or you can, of course, pick say, the more government reform laws. So you're effectively pretending to write the law in front of them until they walk out the door and then ripping it up. This, of course, works in the short term, but again, if your radicalism is high and your political party relationships are low and they've got high enough political clout, then you will just see revolution come back and rear its ugly head again. So, what does this mean? It means that instead of doing this, it should be acting as a sort of a last-ditch resort for revolution and really just buying time. If you're getting to the stage where you're pretending to pass a law for one thing, then the revolutionaries are coming along to demand a law for something else, then you're probably around a death spiral area. So you want to make sure that you are beginning to reduce the radicals in your nation. Of course, this is easier said than done, but things that can reduce it are, of course, things such as the police force, the secret police, and, of course, social security, which, of course, increases the welfare payments, which reduces the turbulence of the standard of living. Some nations, it's easier to maintain a high standard of living, but other nations, it isn't, depending on the resources at hand. Now, there are things such as discrimination that can also cause radicals, which of course can be solved by multiculturalism and total separation. But in order to get those laws passed, you will often have to upset the existing political parties. Oh, give me a second, guys. I've had a chicken curry last night, and I don't think it was cooked properly. Oh God. All right. Yeah, I'm back. I'm alive. Anyway. I forgot entirely where I was, so we'll carry on. Yeah, so discrimination, you need to go multiculturalism, but of course you may upset some political parties. So the next thing, of course, you can do is do repression. So you can see here, I've got 2 different political parties that are suppressed. This means that they will now begin to stop attracting followers within your nation to revolt or to become high political clout. This is very important in the early game if you want to get rid of more, how do I put it, conservative political parties, but of course in the longer game it's about limiting the more radical parties. So I can see here there's a lot of political things I don't want these guys to enforce. I don't want no colonial affairs, I don't want migration controls, and I don't want closed borders. So what I want to do is make sure that the Communist Party gets a low amount of political clout. And so what I'm doing is now suppressing it, meaning that they'll get a minus 40% impact on interest group attraction. This should hopefully mean that in terms of political clout caused by population, it means that it will hopefully other parties will overtake the Communist Party in terms of political clout, and it will become a marginalized force. It will by no means stop or kill the Communist Party in the cradle, but it will mean over time it gets weaker. However, this is your more liberal, well, quote-unquote liberal party, and this is your more conservative party. So you can see here the petty bourgeoisie. I'm also trying to stop these guys taking over because I believe they had a certain law on ethnic, state and racial segregation, and of course migration controls. And so once again, what these two could do is they could team up for a revolutionary play, but by reducing their clout, I can hopefully mean that when radicalism gets high enough, they don't have enough power necessary to actually put in a revolutionary play. So all of this put together, let's also talk about one final thing you can do as well, because I almost forgot about that. So as you noted, a lot of political things will always upset one group or another. Now, of course, the ways to keep those political parties, of course, is keeping the government wages and military wages high for the bureaucrats, the intelligentsia, and of course the armed forces. Another way is, of course, passing certain laws. Now, what you can do to buy yourself some time is, of course, picking laws that at least one political party supports and not others dislike, or worst case scenario, can go down the distribution of power towards welfare voting, census suffrage, and universal suffrage. Normally, these will often have a large amount of support from them, with the exception being perhaps one or two of the older parties. So if you're having issues with your parties, then worst case scenario, you can always begin reducing the distribution of power for a lot of your nations, a lot of the nations you play, which will, of course, will buy you that temporary boost to your nation, which will hopefully allow you to push through certain reforms. So, in summary, we've now discussed revolts and revolutions, I've talked about radicalism and how it grows and the impacts it has. And of course, we are now talking about our summary. So we also talked about sort of how political parties grow and evolve, how they directly are responsible for radicalism and also can be upset by radicalism in a sort of a weird symbiotic relationship. And of course, that their political clout and of course the level of unhappiness can lead to higher radicals and lead to them forming revolutionary blocs. Then we've talked about methods to reduce the ability to cause revolutionary blocs or revolutionary attacks by, of course, changing the ethnic stand-up or the economic stand-up of your society, adding certain laws to reduce discrimination and the radicalism from discrimination. We've talked about potentially reducing the political clout of certain political parties to reduce their sort of grip over the population and thus preventing rising radicals from them being unhappy, which of course is different from rising radicals from the standard of living. So of course, if you've got a marginalised political party that's really unhappy with you, if it's only 1% of the population, the worst case scenario you're going to get is plus 1% upset radicals. Whereas of course, if you've got an industrial party that is 20% of the population that is really unhappy, then your worst case scenario you're going to have 20% of the population in radicalism. So you've got to bear that in mind, that political groups may not be the root of radicalism, but their political clout can lead to radicals. So they can cause radicals, but they're not always the main source of radicals. And of course, we talked about reducing the political clout of certain unpalatable political parties away from your agenda. We've also talked about cheesing the political parties by pretending to reform up until they go away and hoping that by the time they come back again that the standard of living has improved or we've improved relations with these fellows. Or we've also talked about passing more generalized reforms that would change the nature of your government, moving away from, of course, the autocracy of the old style. So that's it. Thank you all for watching, gentlemen. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. This will be an after-action report after I'm finished, probably around about 1920, because the game is now lagging to death. But I will see you all later. Let's see if I can bring up a lovely little thumbnail. Let's go with this fellow here, and then there we go. That's a pretty good thumbnail. Okay, thanks for watching, and goodbye.